John, do you know that this is live over the internet?
Yes.
Good.
I'm helping try to keep the people walk about having
Okay. Man, this is live over the internet right now.
Good morning and welcome to Old Faithful on a very, very special morning in Yellowstone National Park. I'm very pleased to be here today. My name is Suzanne Lewis and I'm honored to be the superintendent of Yellowstone National Park, especially on a day like today where we have the ability to host you, the American public, many, many of our special donors and friends throughout the country who've decided to join us today. We're so delighted that you've come here to Old Faithful to help us celebrate the opening of this spectacular new visitor center. And I want to start by thanking the Wyoming National Guard and its 67th Army Band for their rousing musical numbers. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And one of our favorite traditions here at Yellowstone is our very own Yellowstone National Park Mounted Color Guard for posting the colors this morning. Thank you very much. On more than one occasion, I've had the help of Val Strum, who's here to my right, who's going to help me today as our sign language interpreter. Thank you very much for coming back today. You know, we specifically chose this morning, August 25th, to hold this ceremony because it also gives us the opportunity to celebrate the birthday of the National Park Service, which today was created 94 years ago. Happy birthday, National Park Service. And today is a very fitting time for us to reflect on the desires people have to learn about special places like Yellowstone and the more than 395 other units of the National Park System. Of course, Yellowstone is the world's first national park, which had celebrated its own 138th birthday this past March. So, Yellowstone, happy birthday to you as well. Today we're going to take a little bit of your time before we let you into this brand new building to look at the legacy of those first park museums, all the benefactors who have supported this park for many years, and the role of early park rangers who all helped to connect people like you to this magnificent place. We're joined today by some very special guests who all played an extremely important role in making today possible. And I'd like to begin by introducing some of them to you at this time. With us on both stages, on my left and my right, and in the audience, are many current and former members of the Board of Directors and the Advisory Council of the Yellowstone Park Foundation. And I'd like all of you to stand now so that we can recognize your great contribution. Yellowstone Park Foundation board members, Advisory Council members, emeritus. Thank you very much. We're also here today with several members of our other partner organization, the Board of Directors of the Yellowstone Association, and lots of staff members. So if you are a member of the Yellowstone Association, its board or its staff, please stand so we can recognize you as well today. Thank you. Thank you very much. The Yellowstone Association has been supporting Yellowstone National Park for more than 76 years, and we congratulate you for that. I think my microphone just went away. It's a good thing I have a booming voice. Our first speaker this morning has very strong connections to the Rocky Mountain West and a record of public service that goes back nearly 20 years. His distinguished law career included serving 2 years as the United States Attorney for the state and District of Colorado. And among Tom Strickland's conservation credentials are his role as a founder and board member of the Great Outdoors Colorado, a wonderful program which uses state lottery proceeds to protect and manage the state's wildlife, parks, and open spaces. But in 2009, the Secretary of Interior, Ken Salazar, asked Tom to come to Washington, D.C. to serve as the Secretary's Chief of Staff. And then just a few years later, President Obama nominated Tom to serve as the Assistant Secretary for the Department of the Interior to oversee the Fish and Wildlife and Parks section of that organization. A post which he takes on very seriously, looking over each day the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service. I'd like you to join me now in giving a very warm Yellowstone National Park welcome to our Assistant Secretary, Mr. Tom Strickland. I don't know what's happening.
Thank you, Suzanne. I too have a pretty deep and booming voice, so I'll kick it into gear here. Good morning to all of you, and a special warm welcome to members of the public here and all of those individuals who helped make this happen. Suzanne, I also want to acknowledge your great service as Superintendent of Yellowstone Park. You've done a spectacular job. Please join me in acknowledging Suzanne's tremendous leadership. We also are very, very proud, Secretary Salazar and President Obama and myself, that we think we picked the best person in America to lead the National Park Service, and he's proving us right every day that he comes to work. John Jarvis, who you'll hear from in a minute, the head of the Park Service, Director of the Park Service. Secretary Salazar asked me to pass on his warmest regards. He has a deep and abiding love for the outdoors, having grown up in the San Luis Valley of Colorado, a very, very beautiful and special place. And in his leadership in various roles in Colorado, He's done a great deal to protect and preserve the natural beauty of that place. And some months ago, with President Obama, he initiated an effort called America's Great Outdoors to basically initiate a conversation with Americans all over the country about their view of conservation and protecting the beauty of this country going forward in this century. We have a tremendous legacy in this country, a unique legacy of protecting the most special places for the benefit and value of all the people, not just a select few. Many of you saw the extraordinary series that Ken Burns and Dayton Duncan did that ran last year and again this year called, on the national parks, called America's Best Idea, a term that Wallace Stegner, the great Western writer, coined about the national park system. On a day like today, in front of one of the most iconic spots in America, I think we can all come together and recognize this was one of America's best ideas. And so, now Yellowstone, because it's the first park and the oldest park, and because the vision it took to set it aside when this was not even a state, and when you had to get to it by horseback or foot, was such tremendous vision. If we can bring that vision forward to the 21st century, and as we reach out to have this dialogue around the country with what are the opportunities and steps that we need to take as a people so that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren can have events like this celebrating the steps that we took decades into the future. That's the challenge that we feel, and that's the call to action that we're embarking on here in the coming weeks and months. But today we're here to celebrate, and as Suzanne said last night at an event, I don't think we take enough time in our lives to pause and reflect on the really good things that are underway. And the national parks are something that pull people together across the spectrum, political spectrum, people of whatever backgrounds, people from around the world, and international visitors come and love and treasure these parks. And as I was thinking about my remarks for today, I was thinking about the words of a great Pulitzer Prize-winning Native American author named Scott Momaday. And he wrote, and I think it's very applicable to landscapes in this park and many others that we've protected around the country. He wrote as follows: "Once in his life, a man ought to concentrate his mind upon the remembered earth. He ought to give himself up to a particular landscape in his experience, to look at it from as many angles as he can, to wonder upon it, to dwell upon it. He ought to imagine that he touches it with his hands at every season and listens to the sounds that are made upon it. He ought to imagine the creatures there and all the faintest motions of the wind. He ought to recollect the glare of the moon and the colors of the dawn and dusk." For so many millions of people in this country over the last 138 years and throughout the world, the images here in this park fill one's mind and heart with the belief in the beauty of this extraordinary planet. So to be here today to christen this beautiful new facility that will bring this experience home to people in years to come is a great and exciting and happy moment. I'm honored to be here on behalf of President Obama and Secretary Salazar. Have a great day, enjoy the Visitor Center, and support your national parks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. You know, Yellowstone is a place, actually with the National Park Service, I think began to gain and build its knowledge and skills to be good stewards of this land, and of its water, and of its wildlife, and of its cultural traditions. It's also the place where the National Park Service began to explore and gain new knowledge around how we would inform, engage, and excite visitors like all of you about these wonderful places called national parks. And even at Yellowstone, we also have the tradition of beginning to help the Park Service understand how you manage all aspects of a park operations to fit in with its beautiful surroundings. We've learned how to design buildings to create visually appealing structures to fit in with these majestic settings, and one of the first to embody and reflect those principles is the Old Faithful Inn, which stands right over there. Still today, more than 105 years ago it was built. And that rustic style, beautiful lodge, you can applaud that lodge, she loves it. You know, the rustic style buildings in the Park Service, and especially this one made from native wood and stone, were soon emulated by parks across the country. And an actual architectural style emerged because of that creativity and imagination, which today we know it as parkitecture. One of the tests we faced in designing the building behind me, the new Visitor Education Center, was coming up with a building which was distinctive yet contemporary, while complementing the historic structures that surround us and are nearby where we stand today. Now, I've already been asked by somebody this morning, and I know I'll be asked by many people over time. I want to draw your attention to the roof line of the new building for a moment behind me. And we've been asked, as it went up and was getting finished, what is that metal scalloping along the roof line? Does it have something to do with shedding snow in the winter? And while it certainly will help the shedding of snow in the wintertime, the designers actually came up with this pattern to break up the straight lines of the structure and to complement the mountains that you see in the distance and surrounding you in this beautiful place. Before introducing our next speaker, I'd like to take just a couple moments to recognize many, many of the special guests that are in our audience this morning. First, we're pleased to have with us the man who spent the better part of 2 decades representing the great cowboy state of Wyoming back in Washington, D.C. Senator Al Simpson, will you please stand? And he's joined this morning with his wife, Ann. And also, Wyoming gives great support to Yellowstone National Park through its congressional members. We're very fortunate to have Senator Mike Enzi, Senator John Barrasso, and Congresswoman Cynthia Lummis. Their schedules didn't allow them to attend today, but they are represented here by their local district representatives. So I'm going to ask Karen McCreary, Pam Bulleen, and Ryan McConaughey to please stand. Thanks for coming today. It takes a great group of people and a lot of hard work to provide for the needs of more than 3 million visitors who come every year to Yellowstone. And helping the National Park Service with that task each and every day is our park concessioners. With us this morning in the audience are Andy and Sarah Todd, Steve and Janice Tedder, and Jim McCaleb, and they're here representing Xanterra Parks and Resorts. Would you please stand? Thank you very much. We also have in the audience Kevin Kelly, Derek Zawicki, and Pete Donow, and they represent Delaware North and the Yellowstone General Stores, and I thank them very much. Please stand, gentlemen. Our next speaker this morning is certainly somebody who's very at home in this distinctive ranger uniform and hat on behalf of the National Park Service. John Jarvis has served in a variety of parks and positions after he first began his career back in 1976 in Washington, D.C. as a park interpreter. He's also served as the superintendent of 3 different parks in the service: Craters of the Moon National Park in Idaho, Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska, and Mount Rainier National Park in Washington State, before he became the regional director for the Pacific West region of the National Park Service in 2002. This past October, John became, and I might say to the great joy and gratitude of all the employees in the National Park Service, John in October became the 18th director of the National Park Service. And it is my distinct pleasure to present to you our director of the National Park Service, John Jarvis.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, and everyone here that made this day, this extraordinary day, possible. To be here in Yellowstone on our Founders Day, on this extraordinarily beautiful weather day, at the place that America's best idea was born is really, and to be the 18th director is an extraordinary honor. You know, as the director, I have set 4 priorities for the National Park Service that I believe will help lead us into the next century of stewardship and public enjoyment of these extraordinary places. And this
facility in this location really, I believe, embodies, if not exemplifies, those four priorities. And I want to just sort of click them off. The first is about the workforce. And those of us who wear the green and the gray are supported by an army of partners like our cooperating association, the foundation, and the friends groups, and the concessioners, and our volunteers. And we need that village in order to accomplish this kind of project, as well as to take care of this extraordinary place and the other 390 plus places that have been entrusted to us. And so this is a perfect example of that kind of partnership workforce that is at the top of my priorities. The second is education. I believe that the National Park Service is an education institution, not yet fully recognized as that. Though recently there's a new book out called Education Nation by Milton Chen. He's the executive director of the George Lucas Education Foundation. The book just came out. I would highly recommend it, by the way. And let me just read you a quote from that book. To the many places where students can learn, I would add the national parks. An education nation requires a citizenry that understands its history and its values. As 391 of the most significant places in our nation, from Pearl Harbor and Volcanoes National Park in Hawaii to Acadia National Park in Maine, the national parks have a unique role to play in helping students understand their national identity and what it means to be an American. This park, this facility, these extraordinary exhibits exemplify that opportunity to recognize the National Park System as a education institution. And within that, I think we hope to inspire some young scientists that will take advantage of this great facility, a new generation of scientists. The third is making the national parks relevant to all Americans. And that is a challenge, particularly for young people who increasingly rely on technology for their experience, or certainly to accompany their experience. And this new facility embraces technology in a new way, and hopefully that will inform as well as excite a whole new generation. And the fourth is stewardship, and not only stewardship of the resource, but the stewardship of our facilities. And this center achieves that in multiple ways. One, of course, by inspiring the visitor to come in and learn and become good stewards of our national parks. But also, as Suzanne indicated, its setting here in this great historic site, that it fits and achieves the goals of being sensitive to the environment. And then last but not least, and probably most importantly in some ways, that I believe that the National Park Service should be an exemplar, should be a world leader in sustainability. And this building, achieving its gold LEED certification, is exactly on point to do that. I have a quote here from Richard Fredrezzi, the founding chairman of the U.S. Green Building Council, about this building. The best green buildings do more than just quietly save water, energy, and resources. The best green buildings speak volumes, sharing their message with all who visit and leaving their occupants inspired. The best green buildings are teaching tools. And when visitors to Old Faithful, one of our country's most inspiring and popular natural wonders, come to awe at its natural beauty, they will also learn how our building can protect and preserve the natural world for generations to come. And where better to learn that critical lesson than our first national park. So we have the actual plaque for gold certification for LEED on this building. Okay. So we hope this building sets the standard for the service. We have set a standard of silver as the minimum for LEED. This one's gold, and that's just great. Yellowstone and the other 391 national parks were created because Americans decided it was important to preserve places of stunning natural beauty, places of struggle and success, invention and art, places that tell the stories of all of those who have come before us, and they send messages to those who will come after we are gone. Nearly 100 years ago, the National Park Service was entrusted with the care of these places, and we are honored to do that. We are honored to take care of these places for you, for all of you that come and enjoy these places, and we are honored to recognize this great facility today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. You know, the act that created the National Park Service on this day back in 1916 gave a very strong direction to the new agency. It was to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same. Helping visitors to enjoy Yellowstone and helping them to understand the role they play in protecting this place and nearly 395 other sites throughout the service like it for future generations is the most important thing we do in our mission every day in the National Park Service. It was certainly in the forefront of our minds as work began on this new visitor center more than 10 years ago. We're very proud of the exhibits inside the building, their educational aspects, and one of the things I know you're going to enjoy when you get inside the building in a few minutes is the Young Scientist Exhibit Hall and a classroom which actually includes the model of an erupting geyser. Before introducing our next speaker, I have just a couple more people that I've got to say hello to in the audience. And I don't know if he's here yet, but if he is, I'd hope that he would stand and let us recognize an individual who first put forward this idea of challenging the Yellowstone Park Foundation and who conceptualized the need for philanthropic fundraising to meet the need to build this building. And that's the former superintendent of Yellowstone National Park, Mr. Mike Finley. Mike, are you in the audience this morning? Maybe not. We'd hope Mike would be here. I think he might join us later today. Next, someone else who really started the planning off almost 10 years ago for this visitor center from the ground up when she was our chief of interpretation here in Yellowstone National Park. And she is now in Washington, D.C. as the Assistant Associate Director for the Visitor Experience for the National Park Service. Diane Chalfant, please stand. And one of the great things about the family of the National Park Service is when you stand up here as the superintendent, you're never truly alone because you're always joined by your colleagues that are nearby. And this morning I'm very pleased to welcome Laura Rodegard, the superintendent from Grant Coors Ranch National Historic Site. Laura, would you please stand? Good morning, Laura. Thank you. And my good friend from the Grand Teton National Park and the John D. Memorial Parkway, Junior Parkway, Mary Gibson Scott. Thank you, Mary, for being here this morning. And for those of you that have been around Yellowstone year after year or time after time, you may have well run into one of its best friends and a long-serving colleague of mine. A few years ago, our Deputy Superintendent, Frank Walker, actually retired on this day 4 years ago when we dedicated the Canyon Visitor Center. We're so happy to have him back today with his wife, Judy. Frank and Judy Walker, would you please stand? You know, you'll have to indulge us this morning because you will hear us mention several times, and it's sort of impossible to overstate how much the efforts of the Yellowstone Park Foundation and the philanthropic fundraising that they did on behalf of this new Visitor Education Center means to us today and has brought us here. The Yellowstone Park Foundation worked to raise $15 million. I'm going to say that again. $15 million from private donors, foundations, and corporations across this country to provide more than half of the cost of this building that was necessary to bring it to you today. Their ongoing support is vital to our efforts here in Yellowstone National Park. They are what's going to give us the margin of excellence to inform, educate, and serve the more than 3 million people a year who visit. I'm happy this morning that Vanis Hudson and his wife Cecily, who spend part of each year living on the park's doorstep on the northern end, and they became involved in the Yellowstone Park Foundation in 2005. But since June of 2009, Van stepped up, using his background and experience as CEO of many major corporations in our country to help the Yellowstone Park Foundation attain its goals day after day, helping the park and to serve as its current board chairman. Please help me welcome a great supporter of Yellowstone and the chair of the foundation, Vanis Hudson.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, my favorite superintendent. And thank you all for coming out today to celebrate the opening of this fabulous new building. It's a great pleasure to be here on behalf of the Yellowstone Park Foundation. To help open the public a magnificent new visitor center. As the park's official fundraising agent, it's our proudest day in our 14-year history. For the foundation, this project is a quintessential example of how private support can provide a margin of excellence in the world's first national park. Yellowstone aspired to create more than just a visitor center so that 2 million people, yes, 2 million people, who visit the area would leave Old Faithful with a deeper understanding of its extraordinary geothermal features and be inspired to help steward Yellowstone. To create an exceptional hands-on center for learning, discovery, and inspiration, the park looked to the foundation to raise private support necessary to make the state-of-the-art enhanced facility a reality. The organization was a mere 3 years old, an infant. Yellowstone Superintendent Mike Finley asked the foundation to partner in a one-of-a-kind effort. The foundation agreed to raise $15 million to support this effort. Under the leadership of my predecessor chairs, Bill Lawari, Jane Lerner, Chuck Coop, the foundation worked tirelessly to engage, support, friends, individuals, their own generosity to support the vision of an enhanced facility and educational experience. Lisa Dickman is here today. Michael Carey, former executive directors, led the extraordinary staff efforts that made raising $15 million possible. I'd like to take a moment to recognize some of the partners that helped make this vision reality. We are proud to recognize our leadership donors represented on the stage today. To my right, your left, Dan Manning, Coca-Cola. Michael Rouse and Jim Lentz, Toyota. Charlene Liu, the wonderful and generous Charlene Liu. David Lustig, Unilever. Sid Cornelius, ConocoPhillips. The world's greatest photographer, Tom Murphy. Lisa Dickman. Rob Wallace of General Electric. And a new president of YPF, Karen Bates Press. On the other stage, we have Bill and Claudia Lawari. Wonderful folks, by the way. Jane Lerner. A great chairwoman. Melinda Sweet Held and Barry Held. Previous Chairman Chuck Coop. John Morgan. The Yellowstone Association Executive Director Pat Cole and incoming board chair Don Abelson. Hundreds of special friends in Yellowstone contributed to this historic event, including members of our current board and advisory council emeritus group who have joined us in the front seating area. Thank you very much for everything you do for the park. This building would not be possible without the efforts of this group. It's much appreciated. And thank you very much.
You know, we're going to have a keynote speaker in a minute who's a pretty exciting guy, but I do have a couple more folks. I know that Bruce, I hope that Bruce and Jan Eldridge You know, Bruce is the executive director of the Buffalo Bill Historical Center in Cody, Wyoming. If you're here, wave your hands or stand up and welcome back. Thank you very much. We also have some folks here from the Wyoming Tourism and Park County Travel Council. I know we have, I hope, Claudia Wade in the audience this morning, as well as Diane Schobert, who heads up Wyoming Tourism. Good morning, ladies. Thanks for coming. And also on a personal note in the audience is somebody who many, many years ago was kind enough to share with me a piece of their passion, and that is folks who love everything about Yellowstone, have made their life about collecting memorabilia about Yellowstone. And I'd like longtime supporters of Yellowstone National Park, Jack and Susan Davis, to please stand this morning. You know, we're all here today because we share a love of this place, and the early visitors called this Wonderland. We probably share at least one more thing in common this morning, and that is that many of us may well have one or more books in our personal library that's written by the keynote speaker today. Paul Schilleri spent 2 long periods of his life working in Yellowstone National Park, and he retired from his position here in 2008. One of his seasonal positions when he was in Yellowstone, I think, set him on the path for which he is best known today, and that is as the historian and someone who's crafted a great history of Yellowstone. Paul has written more than 30 books and many, many articles, most of them about Yellowstone in his career. One of his most recent works is a collaborative effort that he undertook with his wife, Marcia Carley, who is a noted artist and who also retired from Yellowstone National Park and a career in the national park system several years ago. Paul has served since his retirement as the first scholar in residence at the Montana State University Library in Bozeman, Montana. And I think some of you will recognize Paul from the recent Ken Burns series, The National Parks, America's Best Ideas. Paul and I both share a love of history, and we specifically share a love of the history of Yellowstone and the National Park Service. And I've been blessed for the 9 years that I've been here to have gotten Paul's counsel on many, many occasions. We've had a lot of wonderful, long discussions about the park, the service, the many issues and challenges that it faces, and that has come and gone over the decades. Today, you, the audience, are now going to have an opportunity to have a similar conversation with him as Paul shares his insights with all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a very good friend of Yellowstone National Park, Mr. Paul Schilleri.
No pressure there. Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this really great day. It's always an honor to share a podium with you. And it's humbling to join all of our other distinguished guests up here. But I'm especially pleased to have the chance to add my congratulations to so many brilliantly professional people with the Yellowstone Park Foundation, the National Park Service, and the terrific design and construction teams, and to thank you all for the great gift that you've given to all of us who love Yellowstone. I imagine that after a while we're starting to sound like a broken record up here about how many it took and what a great job they did, but trust me, it's worth saying again and again. I also have to say that it's when occasion like this comes along and we all get together that I look around and realize how many of us here have career-long histories in Yellowstone, reaching back to our first jobs with the concessioners or with the National Park Service. And I don't know about the rest of you guys, but back then it never occurred to me that they'd ever actually let any of us be in charge. Not long after his famous 1903 visit to the park, President Theodore Roosevelt wrote one of the classic literary descriptions of Yellowstone. I'm reminded of him today because he concluded his account by lamenting that surely our people do not understand even yet the rich heritage that is theirs. TR was right. Americans didn't understand the value and wonder of Yellowstone and our sister parks. But even in TR's day, there were people who did, and they were determined to tell everybody else. to bring the magic and power of these places to life for the whole world. All they needed, and all the parks needed, was a little help from their friends. And again, those friends have come through. Helping visitors understand and enjoy Yellowstone is, and always has been, a uniquely public enterprise, an energetic, creative partnership among the park stewards and its many friends. Now, as a historian, it's my duty to subject you to at least a few obscure facts here. So I'll tell you that the visitor center tradition is really quite old in Yellowstone. The first museum we know of was put together at park headquarters by Assistant Superintendent George Henderson in 1885, 125 years ago. Imagine. Henderson is now recognized as a pioneer of public education in Yellowstone, and his museum exhibits included a variety of specimens, geological specimens, and a lot of taxidermic mounts of park wildlife. But for all his accomplishments, Henderson's a little tricky for historians. As much as we admire his efforts, we probably don't want to know too much about where he got all those stuffed animals. So we'll just leave him with a vague bow of appreciation and move on to the people whose work really did establish the tradition that we honor today. In 1916, when the National Park Service was created, its two great leaders, Stephen Mather and Horace Albright, intuitively understood the wisdom and the challenge of Theodore Roosevelt's words. Surely the people don't understand. Surely they need to. And surely we must tell them. So in the 1920s, when Albright was superintendent of Yellowstone, he oversaw the creation of a special branch of the Ranger Corps known as Ranger Naturalists. Their sole mission was to explain, to interpret, and to celebrate Yellowstone and everything it meant. And Albright's exhortation to his Ranger Naturalists in the 1920s still rings true today. This was the kind of talk that put fire into the hearts of generations of park rangers, including mine. Imagine the pride those rangers felt when Albright told them, "We are the faculty of the biggest summer school of nature study on earth." That was heady stuff, and it was a mighty ambition that was not going to be fulfilled by the National Park Service alone. Instead, it has been fulfilled again and again in many parks through what has become a national park tradition, one that we're celebrating here, inviting the public to help the parks help the public. In 1928, thanks to the patient and persuasive salesmanship of Mather, Albright, and others, the Laura Spelman Rockefeller Memorial agreed to fund the construction of 4 museums in Yellowstone. By late 1929, the Park Service, in cooperation with another great educational institution, the American Association of Museums, completed the first of those museums right here at Old Faithful. That museum remained in business for 40 years. And I'm sure some of you here, in fact, how many have worked at the original Old Faithful Museum? Say before 1970? I was. Well, I sort of was. In 1962, our family made the classic summer vacation trip, and we came here, and I must have seen it, but as an oblivious teenager, I don't even remember the inn. But I might mention that if this is your first visit, make an effort to see the other 3 that are still here. They're lovely, wonderful examples of what Suzanne referred to as architecture at Madison, Norris, and Fishing Bridge. Wonderful buildings. Well, when you study the history of construction here at the Upper Geyser Basin, you pretty quickly start to feel like the archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann digging down through the layers of Troy. So much has changed, so much has gone on. In the 1880s, a bunch of buildings occupied some of this space back here. They were mostly devoted to stagecoach operations. And I think most of them were sort of that way, sort of in the Old Faithful Inn parking lot. But we are sure that the original museum sat right where the present Visitor Education Center now sits. And the original museum's amphitheater for all of those wonderful campfire programs was right beyond it. That was built in 1930. These first park museums were called trailside museums. That's because from the beginning, the implicit emphasis was not on the museum, but on the trail, the park experience itself. The rangers, then and now, never let you forget that the real show, the real wonder, was not in there, it was out here. As it happens, just by chance, the years of my own working involvement with Yellowstone are nicely bracketed between two historic events. One of these is the opening of the new Old Faithful Visitor Center. The other is the opening of the new Old Faithful Visitor Center. In the spring of 1972, one of the high points of the orientation tour for us freshly minted ranger naturalists was the equally new visitor center, which had just replaced the original museum on this same spot. And I'm sure almost all of you have been in that building. Now, this isn't quite history yet, but I don't mind telling you that that second building has generated an enormous amount of folklore, at least among the staff. For one thing, after those ranger naturalists and other staff froze through a couple of Yellowstone's ferocious winters in the building, there arose an enduring mythic conviction that the building had, in fact, originally been designed for Death Valley. I've left that out of all of my books. But I'm not going to speak ill of that building here because it did its job. Millions and millions of people came through it, found what they needed to know to set them out on the Yellowstone Trail. Besides, that second Old Faithful Visitor Center reflected historic changes in American life. In the great suburbanizing and community planning boom of the 1940s and 1950s, there was a dramatic centralizing of civic services. Most of us here, I think, remember that. We lived through it. It was just a part of our life. The example most of us would think of first nowadays is the way we bought stuff, the rise of the shopping center. Suddenly everything in society needed to be centralized, and park planners embraced this trend. And in the 1950s, many park museums were widely recast as more versatile facilities and were renamed visitor centers. By 1972, even someone as young and clueless as I was could sense the energy and hope with which a new visitor center was opened. That year, the new Old Faithful Visitor Center personified the highest hopes of National Park Service educational programs. The tone of the times was clear in the visitor center's futuristically named satellite theaters. I remember hearing that term on our orientation tour and thinking, ooh, satellites. Well, maybe I was a little too easy to impress back then, but I don't think I am now. And I can tell you that the excitement we felt in 1972, we should feel even more intensely today. There we were, and here we are, suddenly possessed of a powerful new tool for celebrating Yellowstone. In a few minutes, you'll enter this place and see why we are poised as never before to empower our visitors to enjoy and understand the park. There's one other part of the saga of visitor education here that I'd like to consider for a moment. Thanks to the wonderful innovations in exhibitry that you're about to enjoy, we tell the story of Yellowstone differently than we used to. But we also tell a different story. Most of all, we tell a much bigger story. As Horace Albright 80 years ago envisioned the educational mission, the ranger naturalists would offer fairly straightforward nature lessons where we could learn how to tell the larkspur from the lupin, or how geysers worked, or what was that big black bird I just saw, or any of the countless other things that we all always want to ask the ranger. Like my all-time personal favorite, when's the best time to see the gibbons in Gibbon Meadow? But in any age, whether the 1920s or the 2010s, you don't gather up a bunch of passionate, well-informed nature enthusiasts and give them ranger uniforms and turn them loose on the public and expect them to stick to that narrow script. Yes, we need to answer those important nature study questions. But there were bigger questions, many of them with imponderable answers. When we speak for Yellowstone now, we speak not just for the specifics of nature, but for the value and the meaning of nature. Not just for the beauty of wild things, but for the essential roles that wildness has in sustaining our character as a nation. These changes in our message were really well underway by the time I showed up in 1972. Right then, of course, we were swept up in the excitement and the optimism of Earth Day. There was a world to save, and who better to tell the world how to go about saving itself than us rangers? Looking back, I'm both proud of our determination and a little chagrined at our confidence. But our ambition was just a reflection of the changing role of national parks in our society and in the world. Yellowstone National Park was originally established for perfectly sufficient reasons to preserve all of this, all these geothermal wonders. But before long, Yellowstone became a vast wildlife reserve, and then it became a vast scientific laboratory, and then it became the preserver of cultural heritages as ancient as the last ice age and as recent as the stagecoach days of the Old West. Today, Yellowstone has assumed a daunting array of other, even more complicated responsibilities as a model of conservation stewardship, as a barometer of planetary health, and as a source of strength and renewal for 100 spiritual traditions. That's a lot to ask, even of a place as special as Yellowstone, but it's all part of the Yellowstone story we want to tell now. At the same time, that we must never forget the importance of knowing the larkspur from the lupin. There's more to say all the time. Theodore Roosevelt's lament that we do not yet understand what the parks have to offer us is still true. Every day, we work to understand Yellowstone again in light of new science, new needs, and new dreams. We have learned to cherish Yellowstone not only for all it has given us so far, but also for all the things that it keeps in trust for us until the day we are wise enough to recognize them. In the meantime, Yellowstone's friends have come through yet again. Thanks to all of you, we have a visitor education center beyond the wildest dreams of Theodore Roosevelt, Horace Albright, and all of us Angie Rangers.
Oh, nice timing.
Everybody look at the geyser.
Good job, Suzanne.
Everybody needs to stand up anyway. That's a good one, too.
Nice punctuation mark there.
Way to go.
You called it out.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, that was my last sentence. Thank you.
You can't. Happy that we could explain it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think it gets any better than that. We knew that it would happen during the course of today's event, so we're really pleased that we were all still seated here today. Paul, thank you very much. Thank you for reminding us who we are, why we do what we do. You know, one of the other things I wanted to mention to you, I'm glad I waited till the end. You know you're being live streamed on a webcam this morning, so make sure you wave to all your family and friends back home who might be logged on this morning, watching for you. But you know, this occasion this morning isn't just about those of all of us that are on the stage and our wonderful special guest. It truly is about all of you, the park visitor and the park resource. So now I'm going to tell you it's time to raise those pendants and salute yourselves, salute our donors, salute our special guests, and most of all, salute Old Faithful who just saluted us and keeps us happy even after more than a century. You know, we're about to open those doors and let you in and let you look firsthand at what you've been hearing about. But you know, this morning I got a special friend who's going to help me make this happen. I got a very young visitor this morning who's waiting to help lead all of you into that building. And his name is Sam. It's Sam Galindo, and I got to say, Sam, are you there?
Yes, I'm here by the door.
Are you there by the door? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Hey, everybody, go follow Sam. Have a great day. Thank you. He's been into this. Ever since he learned what he was doing. Yeah, he was.